The sign of the Southern Cross. The Southern Cross is the smallest and one of 88 known constellations in the galaxy, also known as the Crux, and it's comprised of 4 or 5 major stars arranged in a cross-like pattern and visible in the southern sky at night. And these stars are labelled Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, and Epsilon. The Southern Cross is more famous for the fake narrative of Jesus dying on the cross Christmas story. The sun, S-U-N, not S-O-N, on December 21st dips below the horizon. Behind the sun at that time of the year is the Southern Cross. So the sun dies on the cross. 3 days later, which is the 3 days of darkness, the sun appears above the horizon again, and on December the 25th, the sun is born again and ascends into the heavens. I will have more proof of that in a later show, as new evidence has appeared and confirm our show and From Russia with Love again. Here's a expose before we go into the big piece. And this is the testimony of a 79-year-old retired CIA agent, Malcolm Howard, who's made a series of astonishing claims since being released from hospital in New Jersey on Friday and was told he only had weeks to live. Now, from our perspective, can we know, is this correct and not another CIA agent-based claims designed to distract, just like the Pentagon UFO study? Pure deflection. I don't know, but you decide if it resonates or not. Now, Mr. Howard claims he was involved in the controlled demolition of World Trade Center 7, the third building that was destroyed on 9/11. And Howard, who worked for the CIA for 36 years as an operative, claims he was tapped by senior CIA agents to work on the project due to his engineering background and early career in the demolition business. He was trained as a civil engineer, and he became an explosive expert after being headhunted by the CIA in the early 1980s. Now, Mr. Howard has extensive experience in planting explosives in items as small as cigarette lighters and as large as an 80-floor building. Now, 79-year-old New Jersey native says he worked on the CIA operation they dubbed New Century between 1997 and September 2001. That New Century was a New Century from an American that Rumsfeld and Cheney were involved in. And it was during a time, he says, that the CIA was still taking orders from the top, whoever the top means. Of course, the top has now disappeared. And Mr. Howard says he was part of a cell of 4 operatives tasked with ensuring the demolition was successful. And he said the World Trade Center 7 operation is unique amongst his demolitions, as it is the only demolition that we had to pretend wasn't a demolition job. And he claims he had no problem going through with the deception at the time, because when you are a patriot, oh dear, you don't question the motivation of the CIA or the White House. Really? If you're a real patriot, you do. You assume, he says, the bigger purpose is for a greater good. ass Hume. They pick good, loyal people like me, and it breaks my heart to hear the shit talk. But even he admits that now, looking back, something wasn't right. No shit, Sherlock. No good has come from this, he said. This isn't the America we envisioned. Indeed, and you can blame the group you worked for as responsible for that more than anything else in this country. So explaining how the building was brought down, Mr. Howard says it was a classic controlled demolition with explosives. We used superfine military-grade nanothermite composite materials as explosives. And he said the hard part was getting thousands of pounds of explosives, fuses, and ignition mechanisms into the building without causing too much concern. Listen closely to the next line. But almost every single office in the Building 7 was rented by the CIA, the Secret Service, or the military, which made it easier, he said. And he explains that World Trade Center 7 was loaded with explosives in strategic places in the month leading up to the day that changed the course of American history, or so they think. And on September the 11th, while the North and South Towers burned, fuses were ignited in World Trade Center 7 and nanothermite explosions hollowed out the building, destroying the steel structure, removing the reinforcements and allowing the office fires to tear through the rest of the building, hollowing it out like a shell. Now, World Trade Center 7 collapsed into its own footprint at 5:20 p.m., 7 hours after the destruction of World Trade Center 1 and 2. Now, the building shocked witnesses by coming down at the speed of freefall, indicating that it had encountered zero resistance on its way down. But Mr. Howard and his colleagues had done their job. And when the building came down, it was such a rush, he said. Everything went exactly to plan. It was so smooth. Everyone was evacuated. Nobody was hurt in World Trade Center 7, and we were celebrating. We kept watching replays of the demolition. We had the whiskey and cigars out, and then all of a sudden, the strangest thing happened. We all started to worry that it looked a bit too smooth. We watched the tape again and again and again, and we started to get paranoid. It looked like a controlled demolition. We thought, shit, people are going to question this. And then we heard that people from the street were reporting that they had heard the explosions during the afternoon. When we were told that the BBC botched their report and announced to the world that the building collapsed 20 minutes before it actually did, at that point we really thought that the gig was up. And according to the official 9/11 report issued by the government, World Trade Center 7 collapsed due to uncontrolled fires that were caused by debris that floated over them from World Trade Center 1 and 2, which had been hit by passenger planes. Does anyone ask if they were passenger planes? Where was the pilot? Think about that. If the official narrative was true, the World Trade Center 7 would be the first tall building in the world to ever collapse due to uncontrolled fires, and the only steel skyscraper in the world to have collapsed into itself due to office fires. Now, Mr. Howard and his colleagues feared the public would see through the official narrative and rise up against the government and demanding to be told the truth. He said there were so many loose ends, so much evidence left behind. We thought the public would be all over it. We thought that there would be a public uprising that the media couldn't ignore, and they'd be funding investigations and demanding to know why they were being lied to. We thought they'd find chemical composites in the area that would prove Building 7 was blown up. We thought that there would be a revolution. It would go all the way to the top to President Bush and he'd be dragged out of the White House. But none of that happened, he said. Almost nobody questioned anything. The media shot down anyone who dared to question. So why is that? Well, that is because the majority of Americans went into a complete state of shock and became comatose for the best part of 10 to 15 years later. I was still in the UK at the time. It was obvious to me at the time when the buildings, all three of them were coming down, that it was a controlled demolition. And yet the Americans just refused to see it. Numbed into non-thinking, refusing to accept reality because it meant that their own government was complicit in it. And that truth was too much to bear for the majority of Americans even now. But if you set your truth barrier too low, you will only hear and believe the lies. This is an addition to last week's piece on Kushner. Abiel, A-B-I-E-L. My father is God. 1. A man of Benjamin, who is mentioned as the father of Kish and the father of Ner, N-E-R, and the grandfather of King Saul and Abner, Kish and Ner. Oh my. Before it was all about the shekels, remember, it was all about the Benjamins. And here is the last piece in 2 parts. You better pin your logos back for this. And it's in part a follow-on from last week's piece, and something I was sent this week and thought it would be of interest to our members. And I would add more of the bigger picture to it, and also understanding. And it's a story of what was unfolding. And one particular adventure took place while on an excursion to the Negev desert in the south of Israel. And he said, I had just passed the restricted area around Dimona, a town where Israel has its secret nuclear facility. Now, from my perspective, it is not just nuclear. There is much other top secret clearance level stuff that is going on there. And the report said this place is guarded by the Falashas, the black Jews from Ethiopia who claimed to be descendants of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. So I looked into some background info on who are the Falashas. Now the Falashas were known as Kayla, K-A-Y-L-A. Yes, the letter K again. But also the name Falasha is Amharic for exiles or the landless ones. And yes, they were exiled out of every Garden of Eden and thrown out of 106 countries in the past 2,000 years. Why? Because our ancestors knew they were not from this planet. And the Jewish conspiracy kicked in with the King James Bible. Now, the Falashas themselves refer to their sect as Beta Israel, which means House of Israel. Yes, the house of, not the country of. Now, the Queen of Sheba supposedly returned to Ethiopia with the original Ark of the Covenant, where it remained for safekeeping until only a few years ago. And the so-called Black Jews are the real Nubian copper blue blood kids of Enki and Ra, the seeds of the Sephardics, not the usurping Enlil's Ashkenazi Inanna Drac descendants, who are the founders of China and the Bank of England. My input to that: the blue bloods are the royals on this planet. All of them. Which appears now to make them all Enki, Enlil and Ra disciples, which kind of fits. Now, the Sephardic comprise of over 50% of world Jewry now, and they are of Spanish origin. In fact, the Jewish word for Spain is separad. Now, this was taken from a Jewish history book, or his storybook is more the correct term, and proves further our From Russia with Love Plus episode. Quote, "It is said it was no accident that Columbus set sail on the very same day that the Jews were expelled from Spain. Indeed, while there is much unresolved speculation regarding the provenance of Columbus himself, it was clear that his trip was financed by Jews desperate to find a place they could live and worship in peace." That is their words, not mine. In my words, those Sephardics were the conquistadors that did so much damage and killing here in America and also Central America. And like I said earlier, the Chinese did not originate from this planet. The Bank of England is Rothschilds, which reveals the Rothschilds clan are part of them. You may notice in some pharaohs' statues, many of them have the same narrow and slanted eyes like the Asians. Are the Asians or Sirians? And I'm not talking about the country either. The Drac are the Draco, and they can take human form as revealed in the series V. The article goes on, "It is not over-trivializing that characterize the continuing dialectic by the Enki versus Enlil half-blood brothers lines. Just like the Cain and Abel story. Anu and Alu, it's all about the same power struggle within these psychotic off-world family bloodlines. King Solomon was said to be a powerful mystic, Akhenaten, whose Armana solar capacitor for igniting DNA became the Solomon Temple myth. Oops. And his advisors always discussed the future with him, and it is believed that he was warned of a future time when Israel would be overrun with evil foreigners. Now, my comment to that is, remember, it's the house of Israel, not the country. The country never existed until the Rothschilds' Drac created it in 1948. The article goes on. Get ready. The Ashkenazi line, who now fly the Alpha Draconis flag. The hex double triangle over Israel also happens to be the shape of the interventionist Draco craft coming to invade. My opinion? So the six-pointed star now has another meaning. It is the flag of the Alpha Draconis, the constellation of the Draco. Well, I never. Now, as for the invasion mentioned in this article, that was prevented, and many of the Dracs stationed here left in the summer of 2015, and they left behind Marduk and his minions, but he and they were dealt with back in 2017. Although it appears the programs of Marduk lives on in others, which will also be dealt with in due course. The article says the Holy Ark of the Covenant most likely is the prime target. Well, from what I know, that was removed along with other artifacts, and they will not be accessing it. The article says, I believe that Solomon, in all his wisdom, decided to hide the real Ark of the Covenant in a place where no one would think to look. Conveniently, the Queen of Sheba was looking for a major token of faith and affection from her current lover, and Solomon sent the Ark back with her to Ethiopia and made a facsimile for the public to view. In my opinion, the Queen of Sheba story mimics the Cleopatra story, and also Hathor, all about seducement for the desire of power. The article goes on, the Ark of the Covenant is a fractal self-similar capacitor orgon with enough implosive compression to partially safely contain radioactive power. Radioactivity is the opposite of fractal charge compression, and in order to solidify his trust for Sheba and the Ark, Solomon saw to it that she had his child, so that she would always feel an obligation to her child's people. His was the perfect plan. And you all know what that is. That is the seeding program again, used by all these so-called elites, whose real name is elites. Now, the Queen's descendants became the Falashas, a numerous faction in Ethiopia, and at one time it is believed that there were over 500,000 Falashas peoples in Ethiopia. And in fact, Haile Selassie, the ruler of Ethiopia, until a military coup toppled his regime, called himself the Lion of Judah. The Lion of Judah. There is the lion reference again. And perhaps the movie Lion King has other meanings now. He's ruined my movie. The Israeli intelligence agency Mossad helped the province of Eritrea break away from Ethiopia because the Ark was hidden there and the military government refused to cooperate with the Israelis. Consequently, the Israelis created their own country with whom to negotiate, and the Ark was successfully transferred to the Holy Land. At the same time, the military government of Ethiopia allowed the Israelis to airlift all of the remaining Falashas out of Ethiopia. So this is what I found out about that. 12,000 Falashas were airlifted out of Ethiopia in 1984-1985. Then the Ethiopian government cancelled it, but it resumed again in 1989, and 3,500 were lifted out, with a further 14,000 that were left were removed in 1991. And the Falashas themselves say that they are the direct descendants from the family of Abraham, Marbara, in reverse, said to be the first Jew. Terah, T-E-R-A-H, Abram's father, came from the land of Ur of the Chaldees, which was located in the southern part of the Euphrates. Now the Chaldees were one of many Cushite tribes of the region, and Cushite means black, according to the Biblical Dictionary. The Cushites were the descendants from Cush, who was a son of Ham. But Godfrey Higgins, an English expert on antiquities, stated in his book that the Chaldees were originally Negroes. A strange turn of events, but one that portends the coming of the Messiah for the Jews, it is said. My input: except these Falashas, who are all dragged to Israel, are treated as second-class or lower citizens within Israel and are regularly abused, dismissed, and are essentially rendered outcasts within their own communities. I suspect these people will be amongst the first to be deleted by the Israeli junta, as they know too much. Right. The act of hanging a person is called the crucifixion. The Southern Cross was called the crux or the crux. Perhaps the crux was fiction. Now, the rest of the story, the author goes on to explain in detail of an abduction of him by those from the Sirian star system near Dimona in Israel, which is annexed land-based. Now, some background of Dimona. Dimona was established in 1955, and the first residents were Jewish immigrants from North Africa, with an initial 36 families being the first to settle there. The all too familiar Jewish settlers that seem to appear everywhere on this planet at any given moment in time, despite they only representing less than 2% of the world's population. Does that make any sense? And the great pondering question is, where are these Jewish settlers really coming from? Is it Sirius? Now, its population in Dimona in 1955 is about 300. The North African immigrants also constructed the city's houses. The population was composed mainly of North African, particularly Moroccan immigrants, the Moroccan Quarter. Although immigrants from Yemen and Eastern Europe also arrived, as did Ben Israel immigrants from India. Bene Israel immigrants, B-E-N-E, came from India. Dimona is described as mini India by many for its 7,500 strong Indian Jewish community. It is also home to Israel's Black Hebrew community, formerly governed by its founder and spiritual leader, Ben Ami Ben Israel, who's now deceased. Well, I never. India. Another reference to From Russia with Love 1 and 2. Now, the rest of the narrative goes on about ET interactions by the author, and I will be interjecting and adding bits to it. And he said, through his thoughts, he told me that we were on our way to Mars to see something that would help me at a later time. Now, from my understanding, Mars was a collection center for the harvesting of our resources and also people. Continuing, he said that his species, listen very closely, his species created people from stock brought to Earth from elsewhere. These creations are known as Hebrews, as is their language. Stock brought to Earth from elsewhere. Which is why their DNA doesn't match here, and in particular the Middle East region. And much as this has been distorted and interfered with for millenniums. The author goes on, his species are now in league with the remnants of the original creations, the Israelis, to correct and purify them before the next wave of interruptions occur. Apparently the Sirians, Sirius, felt that these Hebrew remnants were not genetically whole beings that they originally created. Because it was too late to change their physical structure, it had become necessary to change their mind patterns, thus enabling them to interface with other alien beings. The Sirians said that we're going back to our homeworld, Kahum, not a K, which orbited Sirius A in that binary star system. Now, Kahum was referenced last week. And Kahum is a frozen world covered in ice and snow. The sun's glare on the surface was blinding, and the inhabitants lived underground. Sounds like the Asian world, does it not? The once subtropical world Kahum was pushed out of its original orbit by wars eons ago, just like Midgard then. And from space it looks blue and white, and the planet has no moons. Why? Probably because they were needed elsewhere as craft. Or they destroyed them. A victim of the original battle between good and evil, Kahum was blown from its cradle orbit by those who created the Draco race, the reptilians who seek to dominate the galaxy and beyond. The creators of the Draco races came from another time and space. The first genesis of Lucifer, and their name denotes the epitome of evil. Occupying the same physical location as Kahum, but at a different vibratory resonance, is a non-physical world governed by a council of 9 beings known as the Ohalu Council. O-H-A-L-U Council. Oh dear. Occupying the same space, but a different vibratory resonance. Remember the show when two worlds became three? While not the same beings referred to as the Nine in other literature, they do communicate with the Nine as well as participate in joint projects. Now, my input to that is the infamous Council of Nine of the alt media and the love and light people, which may be related to the Circle of Nine, as above, so below. The author goes on, in his work with channelers, he came across a few individuals who claimed to be in contact with this ET group, and Uri Geller was the first to actually identify them as former physical beings who transferred their minds and soul essences into the 9 advanced computers. Geller was a dark magician initiate, just saying. Each one of these computers represents a different aspect of the mind of God. Oh dear. My input, that was part of the AI control system and was used against us. And those involved were convinced they were doing something for the good only to find out differently. What they've just explained is, that is your AI sky god. That people have not been praying to, they were being preyed upon by some sky god with anger management issues who sits on a cloud. A cloud is a database collection service for the internet. An AI is a database collection service for the recording of humanity. Are you getting the picture now? Channeling was the realms of the Greys. With the technology and AI database, they knew your voice, thoughts, traits, opinions, habits and connections to all other people, and just told people what they wanted to hear in familiar voices. And it's a bit like the modern day Alexa. It is a listening and recording device that can play back and imitate the people near it. Now, the Council of Nine, it is said, can communicate with a few select individuals across the planet in an effort to upgrade, they say, the collective consciousness of humankind. Wrong. They lied. It was to hold us hostage again. They have a vested interest in keeping this version of humanity down so they can harvest. And unless they act quickly on several requests made to the Galactic Council, it has to be assumed that they are part of it. Talk is one thing, but we need actions here and proper people appointed in leading positions, not programmed people. The author goes on, I was originally sent to Earth on the Ohalu Council, who directed the Sirians on the creation of my physical body. They had told me there are 9 beings on Earth who are like me. Each one is directed by a member of the council, and I was shown my past and future while I was on Cahoon. I was taken to a planet orbiting Sirius B that was a tropical, swampy jungle world occupied by short, stocky beings who live in huts. Possibly egregores. Extremely advanced, these creatures can astral project anywhere they want to at will. They rely on others for physical transportation off-world, but as they have no need to go anywhere else, they rarely do so. Communicating exclusively by mind linking. They do not have a spoken language. The Sirians told me of the coming Earth invasion by the Draco, and the Orion Confederation was working with the Draco, and that there is a war ongoing right now between the Sirians and the Orions. And yes, that was taking place. The supreme merchants of the universe, the Sirians, actually supplied the Orion groups with the weapons that are now being used against them. Oh dear, what a common theme that is. As above, so below. He said, however, the Sirians kept the best and most powerful for themselves, so they never lose. Oh dear, again, that arrogance has led many a downfall. And the reality is everyone loses in war. And the sooner people and beings realize that, the better for us all. The author said, Sirians see the Orions as bad children who play with matches. They do not seek to destroy them, but to keep them in check. And they allow humans, Orions and the Draco to follow their own destinies. They allow. That's not good terminology. Who made them God? Despite not wanting to leave, he said, the Oahu Council convinced me to return to Earth. Arriving back in Israel, I found that only 3 days had passed. I was unceasingly thirsty. I had lost 10 pounds and was so tired I could not see straight. That is a common complaint. Upon returning to Holon, I slept for almost an entire week. During my return rest, I realized that the Ark of the Covenant is actually a communication device between the physical world and hyperspace. The Sirians apparently gave the Hebrews instructions for building it. A reconstruction of the device was built by the University of Minnesota years ago, following the instructions given in the Bible. Like I said, the Bible is their story, not ours. It was so electrically charged and dangerous that it had to be destroyed. And he said, I believe that the Sirians are trying to undermine the plans of all the factions involved on Earth. My comment on that? Don't make the mistake that because the Sirians are fighting the Orions and or the Draco, that they are the good guys. It is a common misconception now. They haven't even dealt with their own creations, these Hebrew Anunnaki on our world. You know, the Rothschilds clan, when Kim and I had a chat, more Kim than I, the Rothschilds actually think they're the good guys here when compared to the Black Sun elements. No, they are two sides of the same coin. It was the Sirians who gave the Hebrews the Torah, they say, but the Torah is a watered-down, Christianized book that removes the evil elements of the original book called the Talmud. The Sirians, who also brought us the black cube harvesting technology. Yes, you who go to the Mecca, you're being harvested. Some of the bloodline families are from there, the Carnegies. I spoke to one of them who said of their plans was to fire up this planet's drive engine and return into Sirius, their home. I assured him that will never be happening in his or any other lifetime. We're heading to Sagittarius.